In April 1912, the legendary ocean liner RMS Titanic began its maiden voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. While much of the world remembers the luxury of first-class passengers and the famous grand staircase, there was another side of the Titanic that often remains hidden in history. Deep within the lower decks of the ship lived hundreds of third-class passengers, many of whom were immigrants traveling toward new lives in America. Their experience aboard the Titanic was very different from the glamorous image often associated with the ship. Third-class passengers, sometimes called steerage passengers, made up the largest group of travelers on the Titanic. More than 700 men, women, and children traveled in this section of the ship. They came from many different countries, including Ireland, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Italy, and parts of Eastern Europe. Most of them were not wealthy travelers. Instead, they were families, workers, and young people hoping to find opportunity and a better future in the United States. Despite being the lowest class aboard the ship, the conditions for third-class passengers on the Titanic were actually considered quite good compared to other ships of the early 20th century. Many immigrant ships of that time offered very crowded and uncomfortable conditions. In contrast, the Titanic provided separate cabins, better ventilation, and proper dining areas for third-class travelers. The cabins for third-class passengers were simple but functional. Most rooms contained 2 to 6 bunk beds, basic furniture, and shared washing facilities nearby. Families often stayed together in these small cabins during the journey. While the accommodations were modest compared to first class, they were still clean and organized. Life in third class had its own unique atmosphere. Passengers formed small communities during the voyage. Because many people came from similar cultural backgrounds, they often spoke the same languages and shared traditions. Music, storytelling, and conversation filled the common areas during the evenings. One of the most important parts of daily life for third-class passengers was the dining hall. Unlike first-class travelers who enjoyed elaborate multi-course meals, third-class passengers were served simpler food. However, the meals were still warm, filling, and often better than what many immigrants were used to in their home countries. Typical meals included soups, bread, potatoes, stews, vegetables, and sometimes meat or fish. These dishes were designed to provide energy for passengers during the long journey across the Atlantic. For families traveling together, the dining hall became a place where they could relax and share meals with other travelers who were on the same journey toward a new life. During the daytime, third-class passengers often spent time walking on designated deck areas or socializing in common rooms. Children played games while adults talked about their hopes for the future. Many passengers discussed the cities they planned to visit after arriving in America, especially destinations like New York City, which was the Titanic's final destination. For many immigrants aboard the Titanic, the voyage represented more than just travel. It symbolized a major life transition. Leaving home behind, they were heading toward unknown opportunities in a new country. Some planned to join relatives who had already moved to America, while others hoped to find jobs and build entirely new lives. Evenings in third class were often lively and joyful. Unlike the formal elegance of first class, third-class gatherings were more energetic and spontaneous. Passengers sang traditional songs, played instruments, and danced together. These moments of celebration helped create a strong sense of community among travelers who were sharing similar dreams and struggles. Despite these positive moments, third-class passengers were still separated from the rest of the ship by strict social divisions. At that time, maritime regulations required passengers of different classes to remain mostly separated. This was partly due to immigration rules and health inspections that would take place when the ship arrived in the United States. Because of these restrictions, third-class passengers rarely had access to the luxurious areas of the ship. They could not visit the grand staircase, first-class lounges, or private promenade. Their world existed mostly in the lower sections of the Titanic. On the evening of April 14, 1912, life in third class continued normally. Families ate dinner, children played, and many passengers gathered in common areas to talk and sing. Few people were aware that the ship was traveling through waters known to contain icebergs. At 11:40 p.m. that night, the Titanic struck a massive iceberg in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. At first, many passengers felt only a small vibration. Some people barely noticed the impact at all. But below the surface of the ship, the iceberg had caused serious damage. Several compartments began filling with icy seawater, and the crew quickly realized that the Titanic would eventually sink, as officers and crew members began organizing the evacuation. The situation for third-class passengers became complicated because their cabins were located deeper within the ship. Many families had to navigate long corridors and stairways to reach the upper decks where lifeboats were located. Language barriers also created confusion. Many immigrants did not speak English fluently, making it difficult for them to understand instructions during the emergency. Some passengers did not immediately realize the seriousness of the situation. Despite these challenges, many crew members tried to guide third-class passengers toward the lifeboats. Families rushed through hallways carrying children and belongings while the ship slowly tilted into the ocean. Some third-class passengers successfully reached lifeboats and survived the disaster. Others were unable to escape before the ship sank. The tragedy affected immigrant families from many different countries, leaving a lasting impact on communities around the world. At 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the Titanic finally disappeared beneath the icy waters of the Atlantic Ocean. More than 1,500 people lost their lives in the disaster, including many third-class passengers who had hoped to begin new lives in America. Hours later, the rescue ship RMS Carpathia arrived and began picking up survivors from the lifeboats scattered across the dark ocean. The story of third-class passengers aboard the Titanic is one of hope, courage, and tragedy. While their accommodations were simple and their journey difficult, their dreams were just as important as those of the wealthy travelers on the upper decks. Today, historians continue to study the experiences of these immigrant passengers because their stories reveal an important side of Titanic history that is sometimes overlooked. The hidden world of third-class passengers reminds us that the Titanic was not only a symbol of luxury, but also a vessel carrying hundreds of ordinary people searching for a better future.